Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. As mentioned on our program today is Doug Peacock. He spent the last 50 years wandering the Earth's wildest places, studying grizzly bears, advocating for the preservation of wilderness. Disabled Vietnam veteran, model for Edward Abbey's G.W. Hayduke Peacock has received fellowships for both the Guggenheim and Lannan Foundations for his work. His book is called In the Shadow of the Sabertooth: Global Warming, the Origins of the First Americans, and the Terrible Beast of the Pleistocene. Welcome to the program, Doug. It's great to have you with us. So much to talk about on the program.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rick, for having me on. It's a privilege on this side, too.
Well, I tell you, there are so many interesting things you talk about in the book, and let's establish a little bit who you are. We were talking about it before the program. Growing up in Michigan, and basically the wilderness was attractive to you. What, at age 9, you're out collecting arrowheads?
Yeah, I escaped an awkward adolescence, taking refuge in swamps and looking in muddy plowed fields for arrowheads. And that comfort with wilderness and wild places stayed with me all my life. And so when I went to the University of Michigan for 4 years, but I also went over to Vietnam, where I was a Green Beret medic up in the Central Highlands for 2 tours. And like a lot of other vets, when I came back, I was really out of sorts. I tried to come back to Michigan, but I was just no good at people. And by then, my home was the Rocky Mountains. And so I basically, since I couldn't be around society very easily, I camped out. And I worked my way up the Rocky Mountains, and in Yellowstone Park, I wasn't looking for them, but I ran into grizzly bears. And grizzly bears were in trouble, and that took another 2 decades of my life. And I was a filmmaker. I've written 3 books on grizzlies, and I've always had this love of wild places. And grizzlies live all the way from the Arctic Sea, down. Actually, I saw grizzlies sighted in 1985. The last ones in the Sierra Madres of Mexico, and that's exactly where this new book of mine, In the Shadow of the Sabertooth, takes place. It's the ancient story of the first Americans, and it's not a widely told story because there's not a lot of hard scientific data in every place.
Well, yeah, as I'm reading the book, it's like, wow, I don't remember getting these stories going through, the educational process. What was it that attracted you about this particular time, and why you decided to write the book?
A couple things really coincided. The cardinal issue of my generation is probably global warming. But of course, I didn't want to write a book about global warming because quite frankly, it's a bummer story. But neither did I want to ignore it. And the question I asked myself is: have human beings, our own species, ever experienced a global warming on this earth before? And the answer is yes. One time, right here in North America, when the first Americans showed up on this continent. They showed up maybe 15,000 years ago. And at that time, we were in the Ice Age, and the ice extended all the way across Canada. And about 15,000 years ago, it began to warm up. And this warming allowed people to come on down here. And, what reminded me of global warming so spectacularly is I live just outside of Yellowstone Park. And the grizzly bear's most important food is a nut from a pine tree called a whitebark pine that grows way up high in the tops of mountains. And about 7 years ago, all the tops of our mountains turned red because the weather had warmed up and a pine beetle epidemic took these forests out. And so all the tops of the forest were red. I mean, you could see it from the freeways, and it was the most dramatic example of what climate change can do, visually that you could ask for. And at the same time, back in 1999, I organized a reinvestigation of the oldest burial in North America. A child, a little boy, 1.5 years old, was buried 13,000 years ago, just north of me, just about 20 miles north of me. in a grave with sacred red ochre and about 115 of the most spectacular Clovis. And when I say Clovis, that's a culture of people that hunted mammoth. They were the first people to successfully colonize the Americas. I mean, there might have been a few people around beforehand, but these guys really took off. And so this is the only Clovis burial. It's the oldest burial in the Americas, and to give it some attention, I got an outside. I'm a writer, and so I got an assignment from Outside Magazine and used the expense money to kind of finance with a couple archaeologist friends of mine. The reinvestigation of this site,
right.
And it turns out that that site, that burial, is sort of central to the origins of the first Americans.
People will say, you talk about this happened before, even though it was thousands of years ago. Are there any similarities? Are there things that we can learn from what happened then and learn from the book In the Shadow of the Sabertooth?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole reason I picked this period was because of the global warmings. And, what I was looking for is if there was anything to be learned by one culture of people 13,000 years ago adapting to a warming climate. Are there any lessons for modern people today? And although, the parallels are not very tight, I mean, it's quite different to survive, on a planet, with this sparsely populated compared to our 7 billion people today, because it involved bold migrations that aren't possible today. But that's what I'm looking for all the way down the line. We evolved as human beings to deal with saber-toothed tigers, with the beast in the bush. The human mind was formed and habitats whose remnants today we call the wilderness. And we evolved to deal with a saber-toothed cat, not this distant global warming thing that seems to happen incrementally, across the world to distant strangers. And yet I feel that global warming today is really the beast of our time, just like the saber-toothed tiger was there for those first Americans.
Doug Peacock, our guest on This Week in America. His website is dougpeacock.net. The book is called In the Shadow of the Sabertooth. It's available Amazon bookstores all across the country. Information available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You can link onto the website and get all the information from Doug's website. You talk about global warming and you refer to the future. It will be unsettled, probably fiery, and likely terrifying. I mean, you see us going, unless we do something dramatically quickly, in a pretty bleak forecast.
That's true. And, I talked to a lot of student groups, and I'm almost uncomfortable talking to high school students about global warming because we have really dealt him a lousy hand. And I'm a science writer, and so I read everything. And, even our scientists have underestimated, the urgency and the rapidity with which global warming is going to happen. I mean, I'm starting a research project to make a national park up in the Arctic Sea for Inuit people, in the north part of the Yukon Territory. And the U.S. Navy, who is not, a biased observer, they've got really good science. They predict, the summer Arctic sea ice will be gone in 2 years, in 2016. And already up there, the permafrost is, how the frozen ground is beginning to thaw, and it's kind of caving off on the Arctic Sea, on the Beaumont Sea, on riverbanks, and of course, that's just a cycle that releases methane that creates other cycles, and it warms up, and as the Amazon warms up, those changes are all going to combine in ways that even our best scientists haven't put together yet. And I just know that we've all got to fight like hell and be prepared for this. And I don't want to go around screaming like like the cranky old man that I probably am, with a big sign on me saying the end is near. But on the other hand, we need to face the reality of a rapidly changing world that's gonna force people to move to get food, and out of that, some geopolitical things are going to happen, and it's not going to be all roses.
The book is In the Shadow of the Sabertooth. Doug Peacock, our guest with us on This Week in America. The book's available all across the country. Doug's website is dougpeacock.net. Our website is thisweekinamerica.us, and you can log on and get all the information on Doug. Yeah, you say in the book, forces have been unleashed that threaten the future of our children. The early consequences of global warming have already settled over much of the planet. And as I read that, I'm thinking, is this reversible? Is this too late? Or is the damage that's done, maybe we can prevent it from future damage, but what's done is done. Can we reverse what's happened?
We could surely make a dent in it. And I don't know the answer to that. That's why I kind of wrote this adventure story, which is the true story of, our own American odyssey, to kind of get around a direct answer to that question, because the data is filtering in, and it seems like every year, things are happening a little faster than we thought they would happen 4 years ago, and that bothers me. But this book does not really talk about modern day global warming, except that it's definitely the mammoth. It's definitely the elephant or the mammoth in the room of this book, because behind every story I tell of this great adventure, which I think is the greatest adventure of all, because when human beings first stepped into North America from Siberia, and we know that from the DNA of this Montana child, Clovis child, they to the biggest wilderness area humans would ever encounter on this planet. A wilderness 5 times the area of Australia without a human footprint. And even though there were no people here, it was teeming with huge, wild, fierce animals, including a number of great predators that had never seen human beings before. Probably the most impressive one was perhaps the gigantic short-faced bear, which is a Pleistocene scavenging bear that when it stood upright was about 15 foot tall.
As I'm reading the book, I'm thinking, as an adventurer, which you are and have been for decades, what would that have been like for you? Is that sort of like the ultimate dream?
Yeah, it is. That's what really drew me in. I can't think of a richer, wilder, more perilous time to live. And I wrote this in the book. And for a person like myself who loves wilderness, this time in America, it was really the ultimate adventure story of all. These bold adventures, having to cross, thousands of raging rivers and glaciers, and then facing down gigantic lions, tigers, mammoths and mastodon, and especially this gigantic short-faced bear. It had to be the greatest adventure on earth, and I wasn't there, but in writing this book, I couldn't help but write a few. Since there's no science to describe these times, I couldn't help myself from writing a few fictional, pages about what it must have been like. And my advantage as a writer in writing about stuff like that is the fact that I've lived, all my adult life up in Alaska and Utah, and especially British Columbia, and that's where this great adventure took place.
Doug Peacock, our guest on This Week in America. The book is called In the Shadow of the Sabertooth. His website is dougpeacock.net. The book is available all across the country. A couple minutes left in the program. Back in this period you talk about, we're looking at 15,000 or so years ago, that humans were able to adapt and get through the various situations. And I think now that we've got all the science available to us now, but we also have talk radio and very divisive political parties. Are we getting any closer to being able to put the politics aside and face what many people say is reality? There's no question about it. We are going through a global warming, a climate change process, and we better wake up to it quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's our own literal survival at that state. That's what people need to know. This is not down the road. This is not going to happen to strangers in Bangladesh. It's going to happen to all of us. And I feel now is a time, to fight like hell. Apparently we're not going to get a lot of help from our governments, and it's we citizens need to take the personal responsibility to, it's a patriot's duty to defend his planet against all the forces that are poisoning the health of this precious, fragile blue orb we live on. And that's what I do. I fight for wild animals, and I tell people that things are going to get complicated again, and we're not going to be able to buy ourselves out of this one with a lot of high tech technology. I think above all, what we're going to need is just when I say survival, I probably mean it. It's pretty literal. It's like those ancient mammoth hunters, were able to survive for a few hundred years. I think protecting wild habitat. I'm a wilderness nut, and so I found organizations that protect and create wilderness, and I see that as a positive hedge for the future. If we've got places, our home, we didn't evolve in cities or farms. We really evolved in the habitats of Africa, the Arctic, and finally North America. And as long as we've got places like that still left, the human mind itself was created in such habitats, whose remnants, like I said, we call the wilderness today. And
well, you are very familiar with those. Have you seen a change in those habitats over the last 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, this phenomenon called global warming is happening everywhere. But, I work with an organization called Round River Conservation Studies. It works with native peoples, and we've created in the last 20 years about 25 million acres of wilderness. I mean, that's about 12 Yellowstone parks. So those are big areas, and I think that's where the salvation lies. And we will that awareness will come to us, whether we like it or not, and we will, just like those old elephant hunters, manage to eke out a living and survive for a few hundred years. So, we will too, if we're just half as lucky.
We've got about 30 seconds left in the program. Our guest on the show is Doug Peacock, author of the new book, In the Shadow of the Sabertooth. We started talking about grizzlies, and you mentioned after you came back from Vietnam, you went and lived in the wilderness, and you said the grizzlies helped you restore your soul. And we've seen periods where we're not sure of their survival. How are we doing now with the treatment of grizzlies?
Well, we're not doing great. And Yellowstone, I live in Yellowstone. And Yellowstone grizzlies, they're going to the federal government wants to remove all protections for that bear, and I can't let them do that. So that's my big fight right now. And when I went into the wilderness, sort of a wounded warrior, those bears saved my life, and it's a matter of payback. That I've dedicated decades of my life to doing the best I can to save them, and I really believe if the grizzlies can make it, so can we.
You've been listening to Doug Peacock, our guest on This Week in America. Doug's book is called In the Shadow of the Sabertooth, Global Warming, The Origins of the First Americans and the Terrible Beast of the Pleistocene. The book is available all across the country. It's available, of course, at Doug's website, dougpeacock.net. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and you can link on and get all that information. Doug has been called the Renegade naturalist. You're out there every day fighting, and we appreciate what you're doing. And thank you so much for being with us on the program. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Rick. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. You are listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.